So now we have our second panel, the next round table. We've heard some amazing ideas so far. I loved those papers. Thank you so much. Fascinating questions. There's so much that we could talk about. Sort of feels like we're opening up such enormity here that it's quite hard to cover in this space, but really, really inspiring thoughts to get us all going. So now we have, so we've basically got 3 papers and we've got 4 speakers. So first of all, we're going to be hearing from Sarah Amsler, who is Associate Professor at the University of Nottingham. And Sarah's worked in a range of educational settings, including autonomous education, cooperative education, early years care, museums, popular education projects, elementary schools, universities, and transnational educational initiatives promoting systemic, social, and ecological change. So across a huge range of forums. And she is passionate about understanding the power of critical, dialogical, disruptive, inclusive, and ontological pedagogies, with a special interest in practices for community building, decolonisation, and intercultural, including inter-epistemic translation. So she's going to be speaking on a topic which really kind of connects us between the panel before and this panel, unsticking hope, orienting beyond modern colonial horizons of higher education. So that's what we'll be hearing from Sarah first of all. And then our second speaker is Reimagining, who is a lecturer in sociology at Middlesex University. She was awarded her PhD in quantitative political sociology in December last year, and has held positions at the University of Kent and the University of Southampton. And she was also a research assistant at the Centre for Comparative Social Surveys in 2016. So her research interests, as we're going to hear, span critical race theory, intersectionality, UK middle classes, middle classness, kind of social political identities of UK ethnic minorities, decolonisation, decoloniality, and post-colonialism. And today her presentation will explore the decolonisation project in higher education, basically asking where do we go from here? So again, kind of responding and picking up some of the points that we had in the previous table. Finally, we have a joint presentation from, we have Sheila Sobrani and Georgina Cox. Sheila Sobrani is a lecturer in adult nursing at Middlesex University. She's a chair of the Healthcare Academics Race, Equality, Diversity, Inclusivity Network at Middlesex University, and is experienced in coronary care and theatre nursing, module leading in scientific principles, lecturing on areas such as nursing knowledge, critical skills, and patient care. And she is keenly interested in improving the BAME student experience and awarding gap. And then we have Georgie Cox, who is presenting together with Sheila. She's a senior lecturer in adult nursing at Middlesex University. She is a co-chair as well of the Healthcare Academics Race, Equality, Diversity, Inclusivity Network, specialising in physiology and diabetes care, and previously a programme leader for BSc Nursing and pilot TNA programmes, and she's currently leading modules in long-term conditions and nursing knowledge with interest in rubrics, clinical skills and simulation. And so together, with that body of enormous knowledge, they're going to be discussing building an internationalised anti-racist curriculum in nurse education at Middlesex University. So again, we've got 10 minutes. Now we haven't got Anna here right now, and I'm just trying to work out, she needs to have her, where are you, Anna? She needs her video turned back on again. And I can't, there we go. So we're going to start. So basically, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind beginning, and if you have any slides to share, do go ahead, and I'll keep an eye on time. So thank you whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't have any slides to share. I'm both sorry and not sorry. I like to experiment with, you know, not having slides on these things, but I'm afraid this time isn't one of those experimental times, much like Darren, the circumstances just didn't allow for me to do that. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody afterwards if something resonates with you. Yeah, I'm really delighted to be here, and I think hopefully I can pick up on maybe some of the threads that were from the last session, which I found really interesting. I wanted to talk about hope in a little bit of a problematizing way, which is something that's important for me because I've been working on hope for a long time, and a lot of my work has been spent trying to figure out how to learn it, organize it, mobilize it, you know, sort of release from the morass of despair around neoliberalism and etc. And I've sort of tilted over into looking a bit more critically at what hope actually does, and some of its colonizing potentialities that some people were talking about. So I think right now is a really interesting time to be talking about things about possibility. First of all, because I think there's like a lot of popular hopes really riding high that things will cataclysmically change. And we see this a lot in society, that when something big happens and people feel its bigness, they say, oh, maybe this will change everything. And there's a lot of kind of hope in a kind of abstract way floating around the coronavirus pandemic. You know, the most recent outpourings publicly at a global level around the injustices of racial dictatorship and white supremacy and ecological catastrophe going on. So there's some space to think more critically about hope and raise direct questions about the horizons of hope that people have and why we attach to it. But also, I think at the same time, many of these hopes for and imaginaries of alternative possible futures, including in education, are based upon or can aspire to some really harmful continuities of hierarchy, of separation, of inequality and denial, and particularly thinking about Azuma's points about the systemic amnesia of colonialism and modernity that aren't being recognized or discussed. And I wanted to think a little bit about this in terms of our attachment to hope rather than what we're sort of hoping for, although I think Judith's questions are extremely important actually to sort of bring those back in about what we think we're liberating ourselves or anyone else from and what we're sort of hoping with and for. And I wanted to sort of add another kind of part to that constellation, which is to think about why we are attached to hope and to think about attachments in general, following Lauren Berlant as a cluster of promises that we want someone or something to make to us and to make possible for us. And I think the idea of liberatory education, the idea of a liberatory university, the idea of critical pedagogy are sometimes these clusters of promises, especially when it looks and feels like we want things like critical reason, democratic collaboration, you know, the comforts of a capitalist wage to be things that sort of will deliver us from whatever it is that we're seeking liberation from. And I'm interested in when these objects become cruel and counterproductive. So I think, you know, I wanted to understand the brief as to be, you know, something around reimagining higher education differently and better from, I think, the stuck place where a lot of people have been for the past 10 or 20 years. And I think, I mean, I would like to argue that established institutions as we know them are beyond repair. I mean, I think there are cracks in them, but I think the institutions themselves foundationally are beyond repair. I think that within this, it's hard to imagine possibilities for their transformation or alternative futures in which the university, as we know it, doesn't exist. And I think that's interesting that that's not on the table a lot of the time. I think the paradigms that we have that are available for imagining change and becoming otherwise from within the established institutions, the epistemological frameworks we have, our relationships, our embodied professional habits, our material livelihoods, are themselves part of the problem, and sort of focusing outward on what to change outwardly is sometimes distracting us from what's actually holding us in place. I think there's a sense that we need alternative ways of thinking and alternatives, but also a sense that the tools that we might have for imagining them are not the ones that we need and aren't quite sure where to get them or how to find them. And so I think that there's a point at which sort of our attachment to sort of reforming or radicalizing or revolutionizing education, even to create alternatives to or alternatives within, can become a form of what Berlant calls cruel optimism. And she coined this phrase a little while ago to name a way of hoping that's common among modern European and implicitly white, middle-class, normatively gendered, liberal, democratic subject to experience the unraveling of what they experienced and what we, in my positionality, experienced as a social democratic promise of the post-Second War period or austerity, and particularly the dissolution of optimistic subjects and scenarios that had once held the space open for the fantasy of a good life. And I think the public university, the liberal university, plays into this very strongly. And I think there's a huge amount of entitlement about what we think that affords and what we think is impossible outside of it. So I think reading The Crisis of the University as kind of a traumatic moment in a relation of harmful attachment means that the question I have is not only whether hope is a locus of possibility, which was part of the brief of this session, but also whether certain forms of hope are effectively structured as attachments to harmful ways of knowing and being, particularly those that don't question this kind of like secluded and locked box of assumptions about the university being necessary, being benevolent, being reformable, and being hospitable ultimately to radical thinking and practice, to being fair, and to being sustainable in a regenerative way. And I think that, you know, ways of thinking and being that we are sort of, that are most dominant really limit the reframing of the university and its role in modern violence, actually, as opposed to modern democratization. So drawing on insights from affect and psychoanalytic and decolonial thinking, I think help us turn our attention towards the ways that anticipatory emotions like hope and desire can operate repressively, and to think about what kind of work that hope does in a colonizing way. And I take this from a woman named Murad. Her last name is Murad. She did an incredible master's thesis on the coloniality of hope, and I think wrote almost nothing after that. But we can see, I think, examples of these kinds of colonial horizons of hope in certain projects to reimagine the university in Anglo-American societies. And just taking some examples, and this includes initiatives to sort of work within the university and disrupt it. It includes, initiatives to work outside the university as well. I think we normally think of these as being opposite, like somehow if we get beyond the institutions, we're somehow beyond these structures of power. And I think that actually they kind of fall into a same rubric of a modern colonial imaginary. So, you know, the concerns for people are things like the reduction of the welfare state, fiscal crisis, neoliberal management, neoliberal market ideology, privatization, the de-democratization of society, the occupation of the university by management, public university decline, the decline of the knowledge commons. We have things about, you know, yeah, sort of Europeanization, moral deficiencies. There's all kinds of things about, you know, the lack of autonomy, the reduction of teachers' autonomy, the reduction of space for critical thoughts. And these are sort of, you know, these are just things I've surveyed across a range of examples in the UK and Europe. And in the alternative university movement, there's almost nothing, for example, about race. Often the way neoliberalism is framed super economically, as if this is not also a racialized problem. There's very little about gender most of the time. And in fact, this idea of the, oh, who just said it about the unmarked scholar? I think it was maybe Azuma that talked about the unmarked scholar. A lot of it is written very much in that way and sort of practiced very much in that way. Not everything, but a lot. And so I think within these kind of horizons of hope, we find that there are things that are reinforced in these, even as they claim to be trying even to decolonize, but certainly to be anti-capitalist or to be anti-statist, and to be autonomous. So there's this kind of narrative that the crisis of the university is new or somehow recent, like it's the matter of the past 5 decades as opposed to a matter of, in some way, the past 5 centuries. And I don't want to say that there's nothing new about the past 5 decades or 3 decades or 2 decades, but the idea that this is a new crisis or that it hasn't been going on for some people all of the time, I think is a real ignorance and blindness. There's an assumption that experiences of exploitation, alienation, and various forms of oppression and violence within the university are betrayals of the institution's liberal promises rather than a greater exposure of its underlying logics. And I think someone else already said this. There's a belief that the most potent or only dimension of the crisis is neoliberal governance. And this, again, can be talked about without reference to white supremacy, epistemic injustice, heteropatriarchy, and et cetera. There's a belief that the crisis is external rather than internal to institutionalized and conditioned bodies and subjectivity. So the idea that if we just find the right place or the right crack, we can be doing otherwise, which it's kind of like we kind of trust in the innocence and progressiveness and justice and accountability of our own hopes and desires. And I think there hasn't been a lot of critical examination of the deep structures of those. There's an assumption that the world as we broadly know it will survive even into the near future, and that the university will somehow survive this as well. And given what we now know about climate crisis and ecological catastrophe, and seeing the sort of effects of the pandemic, I think this is a kind of remarkable arrogance, really, to assume that somehow this institution, this way of being, will just sort of trundle along into the foreseeable future indefinitely. And so, you know, something about thinking about these uncertainties, thinking about how do we do the things we want to do, having reflected on what we think those desires are doing at a global level, as well as internally and interpersonally. How do we do that when the conditions aren't ideal, right? Like, this is something that people have had to do for forever, you know, and I think there's a lot of learning about why that's so difficult for a lot of academics. There seems to be an assumption, or just kind of a neutral, again, unmarked territory, that the localized crisis of the university, for example, in England, can be separated from the global processes of which it's part. In the literature on the crisis of the university, there is often very little about other parts of the world, certainly, or the imperiality of this part of the world. Yeah, so there's sort of like, at a deeper level, I think there's this idea of a modern and colonial imaginary, which at the basic level, there's sort of some basic assumptions about, you know, that human beings are separable and can be separated from each other and the rest of nature, right? So that we can talk about these things as if they aren't involved in some wider ecology of crisis. There's a sense of linear and progressive time, for example, that is often not questioned, even when it is questioned in a Eurocentric way. There's often Euro supremacist notions of progress, democracy, and development, a real hanging on to and faith in reason, of various kinds of Enlightenment reason. You know, sort of a liberal and possessive individualism, or forms of scholarship, teaching, and activism that don't think more broadly about what it might mean not only to comment but to collectivize in other ways. There's sort of a kind of non-dealing with the nation state, so not necessarily naturalization, but the idea that, oh, it's just there and we kind of have to work around it. I think that's also a fairly hefty assumption. And so I think that just within these horizons of hope that are circulating around higher education, there is a lot of systemic amnesia and kind of complicity about how the very hopes that we believe are so radically different from what we're doing and have been doing are actually tied up in a lot of much deeper power structures that continue to structure even the alternatives. And so this is not the only reason why we might be stuck, but it might be worth looking at, I think, these entanglements and how to deal with these, and how to make space for, as Azuma was saying, to make space and give time and create time for, you know, at least experimentally leaning into despair to see what it can teach us, because it probably is important to teach us. Like, grief has things to teach us, like anger has things to teach us, like despair has things to teach us. We don't want to sit there in a kind of, you know, like immovable way. But at the same time, I think this constant, oh, we're in despair, we must somehow learn hope. I think there's a space there that is both hugely, has a huge amount of potential, but is also quite dangerous if we don't take it and occupy it to understand how our internal conditioning and massive divisions that we reproduce might be reproduced in also our desires.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know where that is. That your alarm, or is that a?
I'm just going to check it to make sure it's not like my mom who needs me, but I will.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Wow, I couldn't tell. I'll just wait for Sarah to come back a moment there. But wow, that was a tour de force. I feel that's kind of opened up quite a lot of the terminology and kind of conceptual frameworks that we've already touched upon. But now you're kind of pushing us even to that further state of questioning those very structural meanings of even the kind of terminology around hope that we've been thinking of. And I love this idea of, yeah, kind of systemic amnesia, and how so where do we go? Perhaps we go to the entanglements. How do we, rather than we've talked about cracks and these sort of places in between, but now we've got this knottier entanglement. Okay, thank you. So now we're moving on to Reema, if you're ready.
Hi, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm going to try and pick up on perhaps some of those points, but in a less eloquent way. I'm really sorry I didn't make it to the first half of the session, but the tail end sounds like it was really interesting. So in terms of kind of the decolonisation project as it was, or decoloniality, I kind of was introduced to the concept and kind of the practicalities of it as it's kind of being discussed now in a more tangible way in departments, amongst managers as well as amongst students and sort of junior ECR staff, who I would say have been the driving force of bringing this to the attention in higher education over the last, I want to say, few years, because that's my frame of reference, because I've only been in academia for about 5 years or so, but obviously this has been a discussion that started off decades ago, and has been kind of gaining force and waning and gaining force across the country, across South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, which is where a lot of the reading and writings that I'm looking at as inspiration come from. There were 2 papers that I co-wrote with a colleague from the University of Manchester and Bristol, and they were both focused on decolonising politics curriculum. But I think we fast realised that as sort of kind of working class women of colour within the academy, ECRs, working within politics as well. I guess I'm more sociology based, but within politics, the issue seemed really, really visceral in terms of some of the stuff that Sarah was talking about, essentially. So this sort of inextricability of what good political scholarship and good politics pedagogy is in relation to kind of those grand sort of classical theories. I remember doing my master's in political theory at UCL, and it was just an old white man each week until the end of term, and then they would just like, go off and do your dissertation on whatever you want. So my frame of reference was just so small and so narrowed. So when I started researching about what decolonisation is and writing about it, my own positionality and those of my kind of marginalised colleagues was very much my frame of reference, along with all of these theories that I learnt during my PhD, such as critical race theory. Post-colonialism was something that I've been introduced to when I studied at SOAS, and something that I've picked up on again. And I just want to, I guess, in this kind of next 9 minutes, 8 minutes that I have, is pick up on lots of different things. I don't want to talk about one specific area of this because I don't know whether it's already been discussed previously, but also I want people to write comments in the chat and questions in the box for us to pick up on later. So kind of talking about how these sorts of kind of critical avenues, I guess, of change, of pedagogy, of research came to me. It wasn't necessarily an easy process of realization. And I think that's something that I try now to use in relation to how I teach my students and supervise my students, particularly on a one-to-one basis. I had a preconceived notion of what good academic practice was. I always felt that when I walked into a classroom, people were disappointed because they're like, what am I going to learn from someone who's not middle-aged, who's not white, who's not male? She's not professorial. I managed to put on what I think is a good middle-class accent, but my husband says that I still sound like I'm from Southeast London. So, there you go. Even that doesn't perhaps work all the time. So I had to decolonize my own preconceptions that I held right there in the back of my mind about what good scholarship is, about what good academic practice is. And I had to go right back and do that hard work myself. So to some extent, I often am quite hard on my students as well, because for me, no one told me, having 2 white supervisors when I did my PhD and 2 white examiners, and none of whom were clued up on critical race theories, and that's a story for another day. I had to work out and find out what CRT is, what post-colonialism is, who Cedric Robinson is, who Du Bois is, and all of these, key thinkers that now kind of form part of the cornerstone of my own research and my teaching practice going forward. But I was very much inculcated into traditional ways of teaching and practicing. I loved the lecture format. I thought that was inspired and it made me feel so lovely and arrogant, and it was a great feeling to just stand there, to pontificate at students and then to leave and not even look at them, But I think we know now, and the conversation previously probably established, that isn't a viable way going forward. And it wasn't then, and it isn't now, and it definitely isn't going to be going forward, both in practical logistical terms, but also in, you know, creating a sense of epistemic distance and disengagement with what are predominantly working class Black and Asian students that are in our department of sociology and criminology, and to some extent politics at Middlesex University. In terms of trying to take this kind of scholarly interest in literature around decolonisation since I started at Middlesex and bringing it into, I would say, practice, as it were, there's all sorts of, so when I say opportunities and challenges, I think I mentioned that in the bio, it's not easy, and I think people have brought this up, to differentiate and demarcate what an opportunity is from what a challenge is. And it's definitely not now, because we don't know what things are going to be like going forward. So I've got, you know, this, I had this preconception that Corona was just going to cause a spanner in the works, that all of these fantastic sort of seminars and conferences that we were having, and all of these off-the-cuff ad hoc conversations and remarks that my students were making in classrooms that we would take and use to steer in interesting directions, were just going to finish and falter. But there are so many opportunities as well that I've found since we've had the lockdown and since we've been doing everything online. For example, all of these, so I was also, and I am also actually co-convener of the race study group for the British Sociological Association. And at conferences and at seminars, it would be the same people that would come, same people working on far right activisms, on critical race theories, on migration. But now we have people who are interested and attending in all sorts of disciplines. Whether they're just there for the voyeurism aspect of it, or they're there because they're genuinely interested. The fact is that they can be there because these things are online now, and you don't have to make the sort of investment that you did before. You know, that's purely, I'm talking about from an ideological perspective. I thought that with the sort of advent of renewed protest around Black Lives Matter as well, I just thought this is going to be, you know, a media capture moment that is going to be kind of superficial, and that's going to obviously be undermined by kind of the neutralization of the radicalness of it, which to some extent probably has happened. It's happened as well, you know, for a long time over kind of the course of what I've been doing with working on decolonisation as well, which is that people don't even want to use it. Even kind of the most radical people who are doing what I think is decolonial work don't want to use it because they think that it's a captured term now, or it's a neutralized term, or it doesn't really have huge weight or meaning. But it's opened up opportunities in my mind for Black staff and Black students, Asian staff and Asian students, other ethnic minority staff and students to just call it and say it like it is. We had a sort of a decolonisation, inclusion, departmental away day yesterday, and I've never heard that sort of frankness of just clear questioning and clear admission of racial and post-colonial trauma in front of senior management, in front of other colleagues and senior white colleagues. I've never seen that, you know, and that was just, you know, whether or not we get quote unquote change coming from that, that is something that it was quite revelatory for me, I would say. And then just to pick up on some of the points as well about some of the stuff that Sarah picked up, and I think that I've kind of just read in the chat as well going forward that I was making notes on, kind of how to bring together the different pockets of work going on that's kind of challenging the colonial underpinnings, but also the kind of long-standing capitalist underpinnings and neoliberal underpinnings of the university. Being able to find allies within Middlesex has been so important. Whether that's to kind of legitimise the fact that the pockets of work that I've been involved in or other colleagues have been involved in is actually something that is real. So things like meeting Georgina and Sheila, for example, about working with Carly, and kind of other sort of student engagement and advocacy individuals in the university as well has been fantastic. But I think when I look back and see the sorts of movements in higher education that I was exposed to previously, particularly when I did my PhD at City, a lot of the chat was on sort of the HE Convention and the Alternative White Paper. And I've just had a look at it again now, and it's 40 pages or something. Let me just have a look. It's 40 pages, and there's one mention of gender, and there's one mention of colonial and post-colonialism. And it just reminded me of last week when I did the same thing. I did a word search on the university's MDX's access strategy going forward, access and participation strategy 2020 to 2025. And there was, I think I emailed Carly because I said that, like, what was it? The word race or racism came up once or twice maybe. And I think one of those was in relation to the Race Equality Charter, but that was it essentially. So it's about this notion of kind of what is the sort of change that we can expect when there are obviously networks coming together and networks with shared interests, but people with very, very different ideas of what change is within the university, or different ideas of where and why that change is needed. I remember when I was at SOAS, we'd always have people from the Socialist Workers' Party come to sell us their newspapers, and I would always chat with them, and they were on the picket as well when I was striking at Kent and when people were striking recently, and they would always talk about the capitalist system and undermining that, etc., etc. I'm being quite crude here in the sort of conversations we're having, and I was like, you mean the racial patriarchal capitalist system? And there was just a complete unwillingness to put those two words, even just put those two words in front of it. And so it goes to show you as well about how kind of radical critical movements, and then again, radical critical pedagogy, for those of you that kind of know what the literature is like in your respective fields, is really that. And then so to move on, I guess, on this idea of definition, and is definition just semantics? So what do we mean by, for example, critical pedagogy? Because I guess what I mean by it is something very different to say what some of my colleagues mean by it. What is the institution in the university, and what is the kind of community aspect of it? Where should we be laying our claim to change? I totally agree with Sarah, actually, that, the institution is, I mean, if I thought it was not beyond repair, I guess I wouldn't be so fatigued and anxious and miserable all the time, to be completely honest with you all. There you go. But I'm still here. So I do see hope, quote unquote hope, however we define that. The idea of the classroom, again, what is the classroom? And it reminds me as well of, like,
sorry to interrupt, Rima, but just to say, we're kind of over 10 minutes now, so just if you...
Okay, I'll just wrap it up. And then
you.
there's just one more thing that I don't know whether you want to discuss as well, but it's, the idea of kind of defining ourselves and what our roles are. Are we activists? Are we scholars? Are we BAME? Are we black? Are we, whatever? So I don't know whether any of these things are points that people want to bring up in the chat or ask a question on after Sheila and Georgina have done their part.
Thank you so much, Rima. Wow, thank you. Again, raising so many questions for us. It's, fantastic. And I think that's going to move us really well into Georgie and Sheila's discussion. I think this is going to be a really fantastic progression between the three papers. So Georgie and Sheila, are you happy to share your slides? Would you? Oh, you're muted right now. I'll just unmute you. Sorry.
All right, Georgie, you got your speaker on? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on.
Good. Okay, so I'll just start with sharing my slides. Sorry, I'm a little bit slow. I'll go as quick as I can. Right. Okay, so let's just, right, can you see my slides okay, yeah? So where this started, this work with actually creating 3 networks in our university, race equality, diversity and inclusivity networks. It started really just after I finished my master's, where actually I sat in on a completions day for our students, and many of the students who are really well known to us as lecturers came to those lecturers they felt comfortable to talk to. And what some of the students actually said, you know, you guys are woke. So my thoughts were, wow, they really like talking to us, you know, but we didn't really understand at that point what the reason was. And the reason was that we come from Black, Asian, minority and ethnic backgrounds, and so do they. And they felt comfortable to tell us their experiences that actually sort of held them in sort of a screaming silence. Now, Laura Serrant at the time, in 2018, wrote of the experiences of minority ethnic people experiencing in silence racism. So they were coming to tell us about the experiences they had, in particular, you know, that they were really aware there was a great sense of social injustice in the environment that they were being taught in, and also in the environment that they were actually learning in, and also the environment that they were actually going out into practice to practice the skills and the learning. And so with this information, we took this forward to our head of department, who supported us to actually start a mirror network. So the idea really was to have a mirror network for students and also for staff, and hence Shared In and Head In was born. The staff actually wanted it as well. And so this is where we went forwards. But my research also discovered that these students are also culturally and linguistically diverse, and they have heightened sense of anxiety when it comes to doing things like writing essays. And they have this high expectation of themselves that they deserve a first. You know, they're putting a lot into their education, a lot of effort, and they deserve a first. But the thing is about degree classification across the country for BAME students is to attain a first, you know, a first is quite hard. You know, it's at 13%. So it hasn't been historically very good. The other thing is this self-belief is actually being eroded from prior experiences of racism, either being born and brought up in this country, but also coming here for the first time from overseas. They've never experienced racism before. And when they do experience it, they go into shock, you know, because they've not had those experiences being in this country. So they're grappling with a lot of things, studying and learning, and also going out into practice. In addition to that, you know, one of the things actually my supervisor, Paul Gibbs, said was that higher education should have a goal of contentment in meeting the needs of students, and this should be measured against student satisfaction. So this satisfaction level was actually notably prominent, especially when students weren't getting those grades, you know. And so we started to build this network, and we focused on not traditional methods or pedagogies, but actually the fact that we needed things that were lacking in the NHS that we had not received in the NHS as workers in the NHS previously. So the healthcare academics have the experiences of racism, having worked in clinical practice and then coming into higher education and thinking it will be better, expecting it to be better, but it's not. And students that we are training are going out there thinking they're going into wonderful jobs and they're going to be okay and they're going to survive, and they're not, because what happens is they experience racism, they try to move jobs to escape from it, and the same thing is happening there. So we have what we call the Workforce Race Equality Standard, which has highlighted racism in the NHS, particularly in the London area, in that 40% of patients are from a BME background, 40% of healthcare workers are from a BME background, but right at the top, there isn't any representation of those workers or patients that the NHS looks after in London. So we're seeing lack of career progression, lack of opportunities to develop and go forward. And here we are in higher education, and our students have just gone through a lot of things, particularly Brexit, experiences of Grenfell, fitness to practice referrals. They're seeing that nurses, midwives are actually have a higher rate of referrals in the NHS, and also George Floyd's death, in addition to going through COVID-19. So we've been supporting them through that. And this is where we have hope. We have hope that at some point we're actually going to be able to lift them. in learning to thrive, not just survive. And so I'm going to hand you over to Georgie now.
So if you want to move on with that, and we think about teaching in nursing, I think it's the NUS president, Buttigieg, who actually said that we have a Eurocentric, and if we're being more precise, everything is modelled around the Anglo-American model. So instead of using our exchange of cultures that we have and our values, there's a real cognitive dissonance. So what we actually want to do, and what we have been practicing within healthcare, is we've been bringing in the differences. So if you think about when you were taught, you think about what did you see? How many of us actually had Black tutors or Asian tutors? If you look at the way that the university frameworks are set up, again, it's very much Anglophone. We try to get them to fit in to those frameworks that we have as being normality. So within our own departments, we've done practical things. So everyone talks about decolonizing the curriculum or internationalizing the curriculum. And to do that, we think about all the books and the writers. But you need to have a basis of and a body of knowledge to do that to begin with. So we started with practical things. So if you're going to teach people, teach them about a mannequin. Get a mannequin that's Black, get a mannequin that's Asian. Get them all the different limbs and things that they think about. So I'm going to bring up this image. When you look at this image, what do you see? And I know that there's some healthcare professionals in the audience. What do you think that this is? And I'm going to have a quick look in the chat to see what you all come up with. Any of you see any differences between this? Well, for those of you that don't know, this is really relevant to COVID-19. This is called Kawasaki's disease. Do you want to click the slide, Sheila? And this is a comparison, and this is some of the ways and the practical ways that you can actually teach in the undergraduate curriculums, things that people would miss. Because if you look at the Black skin, you can hardly see anything. It looks more like maybe there's a bit of a rash. But if you look at white skin, it's quite easy and very comparative that you can see that what's there. And so if you want to know why people, or maybe perhaps why we have such a high BAME COVID mortality rate, it's because it's being missed. Next slide, Sheila. So here's another one. Can you see this, Mark? What does that look like to any of you in your minds, especially if you've got any social workers? Next one. If you saw that and you were in a hospital or any sort of department, what would you think that that was? If you look really carefully, this is what we commonly call a Mongolian blue spot, as it used to be called, now being called the slate mark, slate Nevy mark. And it's often mistaken for physical abuse. So if you are a Black parent taking your child in to be seen, a little baby, it was actually used in places like South Africa to able to nominate people into different categories of white, Black and coloured. And so we still got a lot more work to be done. Now these ones, I just wanted to show you what chickenpox looks like on a Black skin, and this isn't something that we always teach. And on the right hand side, this is what eczema looks like on Black skin, which is completely different to how it presents on white skin and might not necessarily be picked up. So I'm going to pass you back to my colleague, who's going to continue on.
So what we also need to think about is that anti-racist pedagogy isn't about simply incorporating, you know, certain types of content onto our courses and curriculum discipline. It's also about how one teaches. And even in courses where race isn't just subject matter, it begins with the faculty's awareness and self-reflection of their social position. It leads to the application of this analysis, not just their teaching, but also their discipline, research and departmental, university and community work. In other words, anti-racist pedagogy is an organising effort for institutional and social change. It's much broader than just teaching in the classroom. And so one of our colleagues who actually just presented his paper today, interestingly enough, I'm just going to come out and stop screen sharing and share this with you. So one of our, actually some of our colleagues, Burnett, Morley, Grant et al, actually came out with this comment. So unapologetically, he said to me, unapologetically, dismantling racism in nursing and midwifery education is not a singular revolution or transient movement, but a way of life and an ongoing professional obligation for every nurse and midwife. So if we use that approach in all our professions, whether it's law, social work, psychology, and we apply that principle in actually sweeping, decolonising, and delivering an anti-racist curriculum, that doesn't mean it's anti-white. It just means that it's a different approach to teaching. And it also means that our learners are actually going to be able to access our resources, our materials, our way of teaching and learning much more easily. But that's open to question. And I'm sure you probably have a lot of questions to ask as well. So thank you very much. I hope that was in time.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely perfect. Thank you so much, Sheila and Georgie. Wow, what a trajectory those papers have taken us on. Thank you so much. I was sort of thinking, as we really thinking about this relationship to the institution, is the institution beyond repair? Kind of now from the three of you, are we dealing with kind of cracks, entanglements, or ruin? Definitely systemic. Who's allowed to look for change and where? And thinking of Sarah saying the crisis has been for 5 centuries, but then Reba saying there are kind of moments of conversation right now that you haven't seen before, but where is the change kind of really located? We've got the classroom. Really good to kind of come back to practice there through Sheila and Georgie, thinking about this is physical. This isn't just going to the books, and I think that's the case in all of our disciplines, wherever we're coming from. And these kind of spaces of despair, Anglo and American centric. I liked this idea of kind of the goal of contentment. I think, Sheila, you said that was that Paul Gibbs who'd said this kind of, how do we kind of welcome students back? And when they're facing racism, how do you kind of thrive rather than survive? And that's the point to end, that it's kind of, not transient, but a way of life. So yeah, we've got so much to discuss here. I'm just thinking, would you like to raise any questions between yourselves as the panel that has just completed, or perhaps some of the panelists from the papers before that has triggered some points that were relating to your research presentation that you'd like to kind of start the conversation?
I think possibly I went to a study day recently, and it was very much about internationalizing the curriculum. And they were talking about how we needed to incorporate that wider experience of diversity. And at Middlesex, one of the key things that we've picked up from within our group is, as the students have said, we come here because you look like us. And that is a huge strength, I think, that we need to capitalize on. They come because they see in us, when they experience things in practice, they have things that they can come back and they can talk to us about and explore, and know that we're going to listen to them, but we're going to listen without making any judgments, without saying they're just moaning or complaining, and that we will take it on board and help them to unpick how to deal with these instances. Because it's very difficult as a student that we give them our lovely ivory towers, we tell them that, oh, everything is wonderful, and then they get out there and then wham, they're confronted with, well, oh my God, I've been told about my hair. You've got locks, cut it off, because that's not Anglo-centric. When actually what we should be doing, we should be embracing that actually, no, it's just different. And the same way you would tell somebody with long hair who was white, put it up and off the collar, it's the same thing you should say to somebody with locks. So it's just the little things and the nuances. Somebody in there has, with healthcare, they've got a question about She's a global health and health professional education, and she's read Freire and Hooks. The only other people that I can think of perhaps to tell her to look at is maybe Lisk 2015 and Goo.
Nicola Rollock.
Yeah, Nicola Rollock as well. And they talk a lot about this exchange of cultures and this cognitive dissonance that could possibly be something else that she could look at if that's what she was talking about. But it's all to do with the literature about decolonizing. That's what I can say to you for that one.
Thank you for that. Thanks. I'm sorry, Sheila.
Sorry, I was going to pick up on Carly's point about allies, which was really interesting because this terminology allies has become very prominent since the Black Lives Matter movement, and it is about the stage of actually understanding a number of things about racism and where to go forward from that, and also where you are in the place of things. So people who are really allied to it are actually open-minded to the prospect of change and understanding, you know, where they are in terms of privilege. So our students, our academics need to work together, you know, collectively to bring about change. It's not going to happen unless people are working together and putting everything behind this, bringing it forward. So hence Rima's point, you know, about actually working with the wider department, with a united sort of collaboration process. That's really important in actually bringing about, you know, change in the curriculum and looking at improving it for our students, because our students are 81% BME in the nursing cohort, if not higher. And I'm sure across the board, I think we are now at the highest, we are one of the highest universities who've got highest proportion of BME students or Black, minority and ethnic students. So I think it's at 67% now. And so we've got every reason to go forward on this, rather opposed to the other way.
And that, in a way, that sort of, I don't know, Darren I'm just thinking of coming back to some of the points Inslee thinks. Sarah, where do you locate change? Darren, I was just thinking of your points around kind of bodies and alliance. Judith, coming back to your point of commensality, these kind of ideas of collectivity, and is that where hope can be located? If we question what hope actually means.
I don't think any struggles within the university can make sense unless they're linked to wider struggles outside and beyond the university. It was interesting listening to Sarah's paper because I forgot to ask. We were each invited to pose a question for wider discussion. I forgot to pose mine, and my question was, why are we being asked to think about the university in terms of hope? And that was the question I was going to pose, to kind of problematize hope as the kind of thing upon which this all hangs.
Maybe would we be better in the, what was the phrase you used, Sarah? You kind of started with a morass of despair. Is that the place?
I don't know that would be the most generative place to start, but I think we could probably, develop something or some things that might be different.
Shall we open up to any other panelists want to kind of respond to the papers that have just taken place?
Just with gratitude, I found them really, really rich and provocative and helpful. So.
Okay, so have we got some questions from the audience? Anybody would like to note down? We've got a few different things coming up, and I also know that Kimberly, are you there still? Maybe note in the chat. So we have Kimberly Jenkins here. I'm going to Kimberly was we very much hoped she'd be a panelist today, and she's had a lot going on. So, but she was very keen to be part of the discussion and had some questions. I'm just promoting her to panelist, so she should be appearing here. So it should be able to turn on your video, Kim, as well. There we go. Hi, welcome. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. So I know that we definitely, when Georgie and Sheila were talking about the role of the body, and as a fashion lecturer, that definitely came back to me, kind of reflecting about relationships to practice. And I know that you've worked a lot. You've just relaunched the race and fashion database.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to talk a little bit more if you had questions for the panel.
Yes, I mean, at the very least, I can describe the project, which I had created a class at Parsons School of Design in between 2015-16 called Fashion and Race, just as a proposed elective course. And it was welcomed on for the fall semester of 2016. And it was supposed to just be an elective course, sort of a one-off, and there was such a need for it, which I've heard resonate through all of these conversations, where the students, the students couldn't get in, to the first iteration of the course, so they let it just continue on for the next 3 years, and it became this space, kind of like what Judith was saying. I was thinking about the space for dialogue, but then there were things I really kind of wanted to guide the discussion in the class about when it comes to theory and concepts, but it was quickly overtaken by this need of the students to have sort of this space for therapy, a safe space to have these discussions of what really mattered to them. So amidst all of that, I was thinking through how to kind of structure this course, and as a graduate of the Fashion Studies program at Parsons also, there was sort of a dearth of resources. There was work out there for sure about the intersections of dress, race, embodiment, all of that, but they were in these other sort of adjacent fields: gender studies, African American studies, critical race theory. So as I gathered all these things to build my course outline, I started sort of keeping track and documenting all of these sources that I found, and sort of trying to build some sort of framework in service to my fashion studies field and community. So that turned into, beyond a spreadsheet, me just setting up a web page or website back in 2017 called the Fashion and Race Database, where I just sort of displayed all of the books, articles I could find. And I knew if I needed these things, certainly other people in my community were looking for these things. And it did just that. I would have people contacting me in the UK or other places saying, many students saying, thank you, I'm working on my dissertation or thesis, and I didn't even know these books existed. Just recently, last week, I was able to relaunch the database. It was sort of collecting dust because prior to me joining Ryerson University this fall, I was in a very precarious position. I was a part-time lecturer at the New School, a Parsons School of Design, and Pratt Institute. And so being a part-time lecturer, I just didn't have the bandwidth to just kind of keep building this whole site by myself. So when I was brought on on the tenure track at Ryerson University as an assistant professor of fashion studies, I finally had the funding and institutional support that was so desperately needed to see this project through into a more robust platform. And so I was able to find a web developer and build this database into something larger that talks about race from various perspectives and from a global perspective. So last week we relaunched it. So it's the location is fashionandrace.org, and we just kicked off a fundraising campaign. I've been able to kind of hire and assemble a small team. So I have 2 research assistants who are using the space this summer to kind of work on projects and writing as an extension of their coursework, sort of. So my hope is that this also creates a sort of laboratory, a research laboratory for undergraduate students, graduate students to come on as a research assistant as we have more funding, and they can get credits and work on some of these written projects and help me assemble more resources, keep track of events going on globally. So it's just sort of an all-one space resource for everyone to learn more about the intersections of fashion and race.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I know that we are, you know, we're going to be using it a lot for our students. So thank you for creating that incredible resource. Yeah, did you have any questions relating to the panel as well? Wondering if
I don't at the moment. I've been taking notes and just really thinking through all of this. These are definitely the anxieties we're grappling with at Ryerson University in Toronto as we prepare for, as we call it, emergency remote teaching this fall, not to be confused with online teaching, because we're kind of saying these aren't normal times and we're not used to just sort of the online teaching methods. And so when Sarah was saying sorry, not sorry, you know, that really resonated. It's like, so yeah, I'm here learning, and I've really enjoyed from the very beginning of the morning for me, this whole discussion. Thank you for assembling this.
Oh, thank you so much. So we've already got, so we've actually Jodie who's our Middlesex. She's head of program for textiles within fashion design. She's saying she's very interested and excited. Please can we paste the link here below? So that would be great if we could have the link in the chat. Yeah, it's definitely a resource that we are desperate to use. So thank you. Any other points from the rest of the panelists to add there? So we had, so thank you so much, Kimberly. Thank you so much for telling us about that as well. We had, yes, here we are, we've got the link there, that's brilliant, thank you so much. So we've got, we also have Mark who wanted to ask some questions or make some points. So I will find you and unmute you, Mark, if you wanted to raise your questions. You should be.
Hello there. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, they're not so much questions, they're just thoughts that have occurred to me during the afternoon. So first of all, thank you to all of the panelists for your talks. It's been really interesting, really engaging. The first thing I just wanted to touch on, and I did mention it in the chat, was it seemed to me, particularly in the first part of the afternoon, we spoke about hope as if it was a singular, that it was kind of a common agreement of what this meant. And it was framed, for me at least, in this kind of the critical pedagogy, empowerment, decolonisation frame. And the thing that was occurring to me, and my field in particular, is digitalisation and datification, and taking a critical lens on those topics. The thing that occurred to me was that there are plenty of people with other hopes, and their hopes is the further privatisation of education, the further commoditisation, the increased market share for their platforms, and the increased datification. So kind of hope can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And therefore, I think there's some issues around narratives of hope and what hope is. And why I mentioned that is because, you know, I've seen articles that refer to, you know, the COVID silver lining. And what that actually means is the chance to get more people using a particular platform, for example. I also wanted to pick up, there was discussion about kind of space and the classroom and so on, and looking for cracks in space. And that's really interesting to me, this concept of time and space, and particularly boundaries. It's felt to me and some other colleagues I've been speaking to that we actually are not working from home, that we are, in fact, we are living at work, and we are always at work, and weekdays and weekends are now the same, and evenings are the same, and this is facilitated by the digital. So I kind of agree with these comments about the loss of so many efficacies from the face-to-face environment, but there's these other things happening as well, this kind of blurring of time and space and boundaries and roles that are all part of and facilitated by the digital, and something that really I think needs to be examined and questioned. And then there's this whole Anglosphere thing. Sorry I'm talking so much, but I think the things that have been expressed this afternoon are very much those that are kind of typical of the English-speaking world's experience of education. And although I was born and did most of my education in the UK, I left in '95 and worked in the Middle East, and now 8 years in Finland. And Finland was a real eye-opener to me. And I think it was, again, in the first session, there was the important talk of seeing this in a kind of wider social, cultural, political, historical, and economic context. You know, it's not just about the university or education. And, you know, places exist where it's different. We have no private education in Finland. There are no private schools. There are only public, you know, public schools, public universities. And education is a public good. We all benefit as a society by people being educated. It's not the individual who is a benefit, you know, who benefits from education. And that's kind of the normal societal view. Of course, there are individuals who resist it, but I mean, by and large, it's like, well, why wouldn't we want to live in an educated society? So we have a multi-party political system, you know, where it's proportional representation and it's always a coalition government. And therefore, I guess what I'm challenging here is often during the afternoon, it's been talked about as if there is this one model that exists. And in fact, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, you know, that Finland is some utopian perfect world. It certainly isn't. And there's certainly issues to do with racism that need to be addressed here. But it's never been a colonizer. It's always been colonized. It was Finland, and then, Sweden, and then Russia, and Sweden again, and so on. So there's kind of, my point, I guess I'm trying to make, and I've gone on too long, is that there are existing in the world kind of different perspectives and models, and maybe we don't bring those enough into the conversation. And I'll be quiet now, sorry.
No, thank you, Mark. Yeah, and I think that touches upon a lot of the models that have been discussed in the papers. What any responses from the panel?
I'll just say something very quickly about the singular use of hope. I did write something in the Q&A chat in reply to your comment and agree completely. Yeah, hope isn't a good or a virtue or radical or subversive inherently or on our side. And yes, I'm disappointed actually if my paper came across as if I was suggesting that it was. I see hope as a differentiated experience and a site of struggle, actually. So I kind of agree, it's a terrain and site of struggle.
Yeah, I think just on Mark's point as well about, you know, kind of this ironic, I guess, Eurocentrism in our kind of de-Eurocentrification of higher education, I think. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I always feel that though that there's someone I'm letting down. There's some sort of perspectives or cosmopolitan and international sort of learnings that I'm not benefiting from. And, you know, in that space, I think it's really important purely from a pedagogical perspective to create some sort of co-productive and co-learning opportunities with students as well. You know, I've had students. I had a student from Slovakia, actually, a really promising student who did really well and was really engaged. And he was just like, the idea of race in the UK, because this is what he was being taught, is so alien to me. I have no idea what this is all about. And he took such great care and great lengths to educate himself on the sorts of discussions and literature we were having. But it did occur to me halfway through, I'm like, you know, there's so much on your kind of perspective and your own learnings from your own positionality and your own sort of international space, from your own sort of kind of national feelings about national identity. And and racial identity and religion and all that sort of stuff that he can bring to the table, and he did, and it was fascinating, you know. So yeah, I do agree with you on that part. But I think it's absolutely okay in the context of self-care to make very clear about what platform and what boundaries and the remit of what we're doing and what we're discussing and what we're working on is.
Mm-hmm. We've got just a point from Katie in the chat as well, saying perhaps we need dialogue between the academic voices to replace the model of the singular lecturer running the class, co-teaching. I know, Rima, you'd said you at first enjoyed the kind of position of the lecturer until realising that
it's a power trip.
Yeah.
But yeah. I have to say, in that scenario as well, it was predominantly white classrooms that I had. This was at the University of Southampton.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a sense of inadequacy on my part as well, and performativity on my part to try and overcome what I thought was quite odd differential power relations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so any other, we're kind of getting towards the end of our session. I want to just make sure that we're not missing any further questions from the audience that people would like to ask, or points that people would like to make. We've had quite a lot of different fantastic chat going by. Any other points that people would like to raise? Maybe if you want to write in the...
Just a quick one, Rebecca. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, right, yeah, just a quick one. Also to bring back to Mark's point of empowerment. So one of the things that Georgie and I have learned along the journey with our shared-in network is that, in actual fact, involving a collaborative approach brings empowerment to both aspects, to the lecturers and also to the students, because we also become empowered with the knowledge. They become empowered with their voices in safe psychological spaces to learn to lift and develop those. There's a certain degree of coaching that has to occur. It's not just the pedagogical approach, but there has to be something in that approach that involves a degree of mentoring and coaching as well.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of we do it in a sort of one-size-fits-all approach. So by the approach of maybe internationalizing the curriculum, we'll be actually doing more than just one size fits all. We might have a wider approach and maybe a global approach to this as well. So there's so many perspectives that could come into this.
Mm-hmm.
I also see that you talked about co-teaching somewhere in there. People were talking about two people teaching at once. That is something that we do sometimes where it comes to certain topics and that. I think poor Sheila was subjected to my flying by the seat of your pants, where I was covering from someone else. She was new to the institution, and I just said to her, you need to see something. Come in here and do this with me. And off we went. Possibly not ideal, but it was fantastic because of the knowledge that's there that could then be shared and that people could ask. I guess it was a nice way of well, I liked it, in introducing like a new lecturer into maybe an unfamiliar arena, but you know that you kind of got your backup as well with you. And I also know that I'm not the oracle on everything, and there's bits that I know that Sheila will bring, and if I forget something, she'll remember. I hope she remembers.
Those sorts of ideas of authority. And then Carly, I've seen you unmuted because I was just thinking that comes back to some of your lovely points about how we kind of give ourselves space to open and unfold, but also again that kind of discomfort and not knowing.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I was going to just specifically say something about co-teaching and how it can be such an enriching and a really amazing experience, but there's so much trust, and there has to be kind of, I mean, I think just the times that I've seen Sheila and Georgie speak together, you can see that how central their relationship is to the work that they do. But I think also in co-teaching can often be something that is that reproduces power imbalance, and where one member of the institution can very easily kind of exploit and take advantage of often ECR and the other member of staff. So I think it's yeah, when it works, and those relationships are so enriching, but also there's so much there are so many possibilities for just those really problematic and unequal relationships to be reproduced. So
Okay, so we're nearly at 4 o'clock, and I think this could go on. It'd be amazing to keep going, but so I just want to say an absolutely enormous thank you. We're so very grateful that you all said yes. And I think and it's been so kind of rich to have all your different responses. When we had some of these discussions at the beginning, we were really kind of delighted at how positive not only the panelists' response has been, but also in terms of a kind of audience response. And this complex, intangible idea of hope definitely unlocks something for a lot of people right now. And it's been really great to hear all your perspectives on that. So we will be distributing a recording of this. It might be in a few weeks' time due to leave and things like that. But we also would very much like to open up that we want this to kind of be an ongoing process, this idea, especially like saying how we treat students as allies, how we draw upon these complicated places of vulnerability, emotion, layers, intersectional identities, fully decolonizing the structures that we're working within. And we would like to build upon this either in kind of ideas of working groups or smaller workshops. And something we wanted to say is that we've got some really incredible people in the audience as well as the panelists. So please do, maybe Anna, you could enter our email addresses again, but we put our email addresses in before. Something we really hope from today is that perhaps later in the summer, this could become some kind of continuing discussion, whether it's a working group, however it goes forward. But if anyone in the audience as well as the panelists is interested in kind of carrying on these thoughts and strands, then we'd really like to kind of keep the conversation open. So please do keep in touch. And thank you so much, Rima, Carly, Darren, Judith, Sheila, Azuma, Georgie, and Sarah had to go, unfortunately, but thank you so much for your time and thoughts. So I'm now going to do that slightly strange thing where you suddenly shut the Zoom down, we all disappear slightly obnoxiously, and like we've all but thank you so much to the audience and all your questions and comments.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Anna. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you.